Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of our Tactical Breakdown series, the show in which we look at the players that have been linked to Arsenal and break them down in an analytical and statistical way with the help of some expert insight. And for today's show, we've got a joint tactical breakdown show. Arsenal have been linked to a couple of left backs, so what I thought we would do is combine our tactical breakdown shows because we were going to be comparing them to one another anyway. It's what we do. We compare the players to others that we've been linked to. So it made sense with these two being linked in such close proximity to one another to tackle them in the same show. That does mean double the expert insight, double the comparisons. So make sure you're sitting back, relaxed and ready to be hit with some educational information about both Aaron Hickey of Bologna and Federico Dimarco of Inter Milan, both of which have been linked to Arsenal for very similar fees, around the 25 million euro figure as well. Before we go any further, though, please make sure you've dropped a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. We hit 32,000 subscribers yesterday. Thank you to everybody that's continued to help and support the channel throughout all of the years that we've done it. If you're new, if you're old, wherever you've been throughout the journey of this channel, thank you so much for that continued support. It really, really means a lot to me and, you know, lets me continue to do what I love to do and hopefully what you enjoy watching as well. Without further ado, we're going to get on with our expert insight, which doubly comes from our Italian correspondent, Italian football expert, of course, host of the Inter Milan podcast in English, Rich Hall, who does work for the likes of Football Italia and the Gentleman Ultra creator as well. We're going to start with Dimarco and then we'll go to Hickey. So without further ado, here's our thoughts on Federico Dimarco from Rich Hall.
Good to be back, and hi Tom. It's interesting to read the, I'd say, minuscule links between Federico Dimarco and Arsenal. In the Italian press, it has been talked about, but it was pretty much summed up in Gazzetta really quickly. It was just basically Federico linked with Arsenal, but he's an Inter boy. And the reason is he's an Inter fan, he's an Interisti. He's been with the club since, the youth system. Yeah, he had a fantastic spell on loan at Hellas Verona where he proved himself. That allowed him to come back into the squad. He's a very dependable left back. He has excellent technique. Dead ball specialist, I would say. Definitely great left foot. Very adaptable because he can also play at centre back in a 3-5-2. So a really, really quality player. I'd like to give you better news, but I mean, I'm quoting Gazzetta, not myself. Even for me, from an Inter perspective, obviously I present the Inter official podcast in English. It's a non-starter, it sounds like, from the club. And sometimes you get word of things, for instance, like Perisic was always going to rumble on. And we knew maybe that was going to happen. And we don't want to talk too much about that, of course. But with Dimarco, it's very, very different. It's very much that he's part of that club. Now, Perisic is interesting because obviously with him going, when you look at that left-hand side, what are you left with? Well, Dimarco is going to have to be a massive, massive, massive part of that because also you've got Robin Gosens as well. So Robin Gosens will probably take the place of Perisic, even though he's not had very many minutes this season. And Dimarco will either compete with him or not play. So it's a difficult one. It's a very, very difficult one because I don't want to be so outright and say this won't happen. But often when I come on here and talk with Tom, there's so many different elements to it where I think, yeah, these potential transfers could happen. But this one that I'm really struggling with, we could talk about if he's going to be a good acquisition. If you did get him, he'd be a fantastic acquisition. But it does seem unlikely. So I wish I had better news for you guys. He is a good player, but I think sometimes when a player is a fan, his heart is where his heart is, and Inter want him. So unless it's a massive offer, then I doubt he will leave. Inter situation financially, you might ask me, do they need to lose a big player? The actual word now coming out of Italy is no, because they're likely to lose Alexis Sanchez, which is good for them. They want to get rid of him. Perisic will be a big lot of the wages. Who else now? Vidal will go. Ranocchio will go. So they're going to make up a lot of it. So, yeah, we'll see. But hopefully better news next time.
A big thank you from Rich Hall there for the first half of his breakdown of these players. Yes, I do tend to agree. Even in terms of Italian footballers, they don't tend to leave Italy. But, Inter Milan players, Inter Milan fans, while playing for Inter Milan, are even more unlikely to leave. The only kind of hope that Arsenal have, as Rich brought up there, is the idea that with Perisic moving on and Robin Gosens taking that left wing-back slot, whether or not Dimarco would be limited in the amount of minutes that he's getting. But even if he was to move to Arsenal, he'd have to compete with Kieran Tierney anyway. So it's a very similar situation. The likelihood of Dimarco happening is very small, on which we come onto the statistics in a minute. You're going to be disappointed because his statistics are very, very good in terms of how he plays and what he's played like this season. But we'll get there. Anyway, let's go to the second half and a quick outfit change from Rich before we talk about Aaron Hickey, of course. So without further ado, let's introduce to you again, Rich Hall, to talk you all through Aaron Hickey.
Aaron Hickey is a player at Bologna who really has come on leaps and bounds in his tender years. I mean, you got to think that the guy is not even in his 20s, and yet he's playing like a 24, 25-year-old. Many of his colleagues have said over here in Italy, and I think in Scotland too. Yes, he can play left back, but he can play right back, centre midfield, central defence. Although predominantly at Bologna, it's been as a fullback, and he's been exceptional. He's been one of the most exciting talents. Definitely in a while from the UK to come through. Really quick, but tactically just so intelligent. And I think there is a deal that can be done. Bologna are not a team who are going to be able to fend off the likes of the top Italian teams in the top six. Never mind the money that's in the Premier League. I think Arsenal will get a very educated, very mature footballer. Football intelligence is massive, I think, with him. He's a man who reads a game exceptionally well. And to say that, to break out, and to put this in perspective, I was on a podcast earlier today and we were looking at some of the players in Serie B from Inter about whether they could come through. And it's rare in Italy that they trust youth. There are certain clubs starting to do so more now. But Bologna with Aaron has really allowed him. They see something beginning. Normally in Italy, it's the mid-20s when these players start to be allowed to be trusted and to be given the space to do it. And the fact that they're allowing Hickey to do it now is quite incredible. Lots of interest from all over. Obviously, not just Arsenal, Newcastle have been talked about. I think there was a link with Juventus, always a link with Juventus, Fiorentina, others. I doubt he would ever go to Fiorentina with the history between, obviously, the derby between Bologna and the Florentines. So for Arsenal, it's a very, very sensible move. And I don't think the price tags that have been linked would break the bank. So, yeah, really, really exciting player. Technically superb, quick, strong. But as I said, it's all about tactical intelligence with him. I think he's got racked up 5 goals as well from fullback. So, that's not to be sniffed at as well. So, but a lot of people have given him a lot of credit in Italy this season. So yeah, definitely one to watch. So I'll be very interested to see how he does if he actually goes from the peninsula and makes his way over to London.
Have you ever seen those magic shows with the quick changes? I mean, Rich could arguably be on there with how quickly he changes Italian football shirts. But no, in all seriousness, fantastic insight there from Rich on both Dimarco and Hickey. It does seem like Hickey would be the more likely of the two. Significantly younger, a lot more able to get into the club than Dimarco would be. But you are going to pay for that in terms of output. And we're going to look at the output of both players now. I mean, just looking at their FB Ref kind of comparisons, you can see how highly Dimarco has performed for Inter Milan in the 99th percentile in so many different offensive statistics. But actually, when you look at the defensive side of his game, it's not as strong. Pressure's not as strong. Tackle's not as strong. Interception's not as strong. Blocks not as strong. Neither are clearances and aerial duels. These areas of his game, the defensive side of his game, isn't anywhere near as strong when comparing to fullbacks. So, and he can play in that left-sided centre-back position of a back three, or on the left-hand side in a left wing-back role if you want him there too. So, he's got that versatility. Hickey, however, exceeds in terms of the amount of goals he scored for a fullback. That's unsurprising. He's got 5 this season. Pass completion moving forwards, 81.8% there is strong according to FBref2. Dribbles completed in the 63rd percentile. Blocks is good as well. But he's 19 years of age. These aren't surprisingly kind of low because he's not as good as the other options out there. He's got potential, and it's about realizing that potential and using that potential to bring him forwards. Let's go into the main player comparison. We're going to compare both of them to Kieran Tierney and to Nuno Tavares, or Nuno Tavares, as someone was saying. I stopped pronouncing Nuno Tavares' name like the Portuguese way of doing it. I've just stopped. I don't know why. It's just easier for you guys to stop complaining about my Portuguese pronunciations. Having a look at the heat map, the first thing you notice about Aaron Hickey is, of course, the ability of him to play on both sides, and has played on both sides for Bologna this season, right back on 4 or 5 occasions, mainly in that left-back position, though likes to get forward. Dimarco, however, more situated in that left wing-back role. Doesn't get into the box as much to defend, and perhaps that's why his defensive stats aren't as high as that of the others. Maybe when we see the comparisons, you'll see them in just a second. Tierney, though, certainly the most offensive of the group, getting further forward than all the other 3 on this list. Tavares, of course, more similar to that of Hickey in terms of his style of running up and down the flank. In terms of the defensive duels and how successful these players are defensively, we're seeing 6.65 defensive duels being attempted by Hickey per 90, 55.5% of those being one is the lowest on this list, but it's a very small difference between them. The highest at 61.9% from Dimarco, the others 59.1%, 57.1% from Tavares. It's very, very close between the group. But Hickey coming out in terms of the frequency of defensive duels he gets involved in is very good. Aerially, not as good as that as, say, Tavares. He's, of course, got the height associated with his game. Tierney, of course, doesn't get involved in too many aerial duels, and maybe that's why we see it as lower as it is for Hickey. In terms of interceptions, reading the game, he comes out in the second highest in this list with 3.93, not as high as Tierney, but certainly up there with the second highest stat. Losses, he comes out as the second lowest in terms of the number of losses he's making there. I suppose you'd call it second highest because you don't want the amount of losses being high, 8.82. 50% of them, though, happening in his own half. That is certainly an aspect of his game that goes against him. Perhaps his age is going, the inconsistency, the lack of experience. When you see the most experience of the group, like Dimarco coming out at 26.8, and then you've got a player like Tavares, again, still quite young at 22, 38.4. It tracks in that direction with the more experienced Tierney and Dimarco coming out in the 20% for losses in their own half. It's just the intelligence that comes when you grow up and you make better decisions in your own defensive third. Recoveries, though, he does like to get into the other half and get some recoveries. 33.5% of them, in fact, have come from that position on the pitch. Tierney comes out really well in this statistic, 6.78 recoveries, with 40% of them happening in the opposition half. Clearances, this is kind of associated more with depending on the club that you're at. Tierney's made quite a few, as has Tavares, but Arsenal tend to do really well with their clearances under Arteta, and that's why we've seen those statistics as high as they are. In terms of fouls, Hickey making the most alongside Nuno Tavares, got slightly more, 1.45 per game. But we know that Arteta is going to be getting into those players about making those professional fouls. So you can expect to see them next season, even more so than we have this season. In terms of passing, moving on to this area of the game, Dimarco comes out the best with 86.2% passing accuracy, but Hickey coming out well as well. 83.7% pass accuracy, but not attempting as many passes. In fact, Dimarco's nearly got double the amount of passes attempted compared to Hickey. Moving into the passes into the final third, and this is where Dimarco really tends to excel. 7.4 passes into the final third being made per game, with the highest accuracy bar Hickey at 75.8%. But Hickey coming out well when he attempts these types of passes, but isn't attempting them anywhere near as frequently, just 2.18 being played by the player. Passes into the box again, Dimarco coming out really well here, 4.62, 55% accuracy, the highest in terms of frequency and accuracy. But Hickey is nearly there in terms of accuracy, only 0.8% away from Dimarco's. The issue here again is frequency. Perhaps this is to do with the fact he's playing for Bologna, a side that are getting nowhere near as close to the box as frequently as Inter Milan and Dimarco and Arsenal. So maybe you can kind of cut the Scottish international some slack there in terms of frequency. But when he gets into those positions, he's very good. 54.2% of those passes into the box, be that crosses, be that driven balls, are accurate 54.2%. Progressive runs, he likes to get the ball forward as much as possible, 1.78 progressive runs, not as high as that as Tavares, who, as we know from watching him, loves to drive with the ball. Hickey, it seems, would rather let the passing do the talking when he gets the opportunity. Shooting-wise, Hickey has excelled this season. 5 goals, and 3 of them coming from outside the box. Very accomplished in that area. Certainly, we've added a feather, I suppose, to his bow in terms of what he can do from shooting, which is far more than can be said for Nuno Tavares, who has a 10.5% shooting accuracy. In fact, he's only got 1 shot on target all season, and that happened to be the goal that he scored against Manchester United. Every other one of his shots has failed to hit the target. Kieran Tierney has got, of course, a goal this season. It was a really nice goal, if you remember, away, I want to say, at Leeds, when he hit the ball across the goal, hit the post and went in. It was a really nice shot. But other than that, can take shots from outside the box. We know he can be lethal. He scored that great goal against West Brom the season before last as well. 33.3% of his shots hitting the target. But Dimarco is a very attacking player in terms of the amount of shots he takes. 38 shots across the season. These are not per 90. These are the total shots for their league seasons. Got a couple of goals, 1 in the box, 1 outside as well, but tends to take his shots from the left-hand side of the D. And that completes all of the statistical analysis of the 2 players and the comparisons with our current crop as well. What you would say once looking at these is Dimarco is one hell of a player, it looks like. How that would transition to the Premier League is not yet known. And it also should be said that the context around the players needs to be taken into account. You got Dimarco playing for one of the best teams in Serie A, in Inter Milan, which allows him more ability to get forwards, whereas Hickey playing for Bologna doesn't have anywhere near that many luxuries. So when he gets forward, he's got to try and take the chances that he gets. Dimarco would be a good signing, but very, very unlikely to happen considering where he plays and the fact he's an Inter Milan fan, as Rich said. Hickey, I think, as a 19-year-old versatile fullback that can play on either side, got a good shot on him, really good to add a few goals into the team if you can bring in kind of that element of his game to Arsenal. And the context around how much he would cost and the potential that's there too, I think makes him a very, very good option for Arsenal. And that completes all of the main bulk of the video. And it now means that we move on for the last 5 minutes or so of the show to jump into the chat box with those listening and seeing what you guys are saying. Kevin asked the question, can we sell Kieran Tierney and buy both? In theory, of course, we could do that, Kevin. In reality, though, I very much doubt that would happen. So Coob says, very impressive tactical breakdown. Thank you, Tom. Much appreciated for the kind comment. Very few Arsenal fan channels do this as much. Do this as much to give their limited views. I prefer facts rather than biased views. Keep it up. I appreciate the kind words, but there's lots of good channels out there. And I know that FK from Latte Firm does some brilliant breakdown stuff as well, if you aren't already checking out his channel. Let's scroll up and see some of the earlier thoughts from you guys. Sam says, out of the 2 options, I'd go for Hickey. How do you feel about our left-back situation? Are we buying a player to compete with Tierney immediately? I think Cucurella would be a perfect option. Yeah, Cucurella would be a great kind of player to have, but he's going to one of Chelsea or Manchester City, it seems. I think we're buying a player that can compete more so for the cover role, a player that has the potential to compete with Tierney in the future like Hickey does, but actually is someone that's giving us more of an option to go to when we don't have Tomiyasu or Tierney available to us for now. But I think that Hickey certainly is a player with plenty of potential available to him. Matt says, do you think that Hickey is a KT clone? I think there's potentials for him to be as good as Tierney in the future and certainly excel in the crossing and progressive play departments that Tierney does. Defensively, though, he's got to improve. And I suppose that does fall in line with what Tierney provides. So, yeah, there is a lot of similarities between the two. Not, of course, just their nationality and the fact that Scotland produces a ridiculously good amount of left backs. They need to stop doing that. And they need to focus on actually adding players to other areas of the pitch that are as good. But I think that Hickey's got the potential to maybe replace Tierney. And if he can get a much better injury record, which he does right now, that'll obviously go in his favour as well. Dad says, can we swap Nuno for Hickey? It's interesting people talk about getting rid of Nuno Tavares already. I think Hickey's versatility makes him really accessible for the side. The fact that you could use him at right back to cover Tomiyasu. You could play him with Tomiyasu because Tomiyasu's versatile enough to play in the middle. I like that Arsenal are bringing in players that have got that versatility. You think about Tomiyasu can play right back, centre mid, left back. Ødegaard can play as an 8, can play as a 10, can play on the right-hand side if you wanted him to. You've got Ben White that's got the capabilities of playing at right back and central defence, of course. Who else have we got that's been brought in? I'm sure there's someone else I'm forgetting that's really versatile. Oh, Nuno Tavares has played on the wing. Albisambi Lakonga, 6 and 8 as well. Look, we've got players that have got versatility to their game. We're being linked with Gabriel Jesus, who can play across any of those front three positions. And we're being linked with Zinchenko, too, who I do plan on doing a more dedicated show on him as well. He can play in midfield, can play left back. It's very clear that Arteta likes having players that have got a huge range of positions to their bow. So I think that's probably what we'll see in the summer is players that can cover multiple areas because he knows how damaging injuries have been across his tenure. Ron, good to have you back in the chat, my friend. Says, hi, Tom. Do you think Hickey could be pushing Tavares out of the squad to be loaned out or sold? I think if we bring in Hickey this summer, you'll actually see both of them stay at the club this season. I don't think either will go. Corin says, worried about Hickey fitting into the squad. Would he give up the starting place for a role on the bench? I think because of the amount of competitions that we're in and because of Tierney's injury record, I think he'd have plenty of opportunities still to play, and his versatility certainly adds to that chance as well. Let's go to Daz says, I think Hickey is a good third option if we sign Zinchenko. What do you think? I like the profile of Zinchenko. I think he'd be a really smart sign. It depends how much that we would offer for him. I think you're looking at what, £20 million? I don't think he's worth much more than 20 million to bring someone like Zinchenko in, but he's a very, very good player. And Maitland-Niles is coming back, who Olivier has called the mainland, but I know exactly who you meant. But, you know, he's a versatile player, but I just don't think he's all that suited to Arsenal or, you know, happy at Arsenal. Whereas Hickey coming in gives us plenty of cover in multiple areas, as does Zinchenko, if you were to try and bring him into the club in the summer too, and Premier League experience. But we'll be doing a dedicated show on Zinchenko, I'm sure, very soon. Thank you for tuning in. That's going to bring us to the end of this evening's show. I'll be bringing you 2 more shows tomorrow. We've got, of course, the 8 a.m. show, as always, and a very, very interesting podcast for you guys tomorrow evening, 6 p.m. Set your alarms tomorrow. It's going to be good. It's going to be fun. I'll be revealing tomorrow who our guests are for the main end of season podcast bonanza, if you like. We got some good guests, I promise. But thank you for tuning in. Drop a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you are indeed new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. It really does help us if you do drop the likes. Let's have a quick check on the poll before we do wrap up. 82% of you have said you'd rather see us sign Hickey over Dimarco. 6% of you, though, have got other players in mind. Maybe Zinchenko. You'll have to let us know in the comment section after the video finishes. Have a great day. And as always, up the Arsenal.